What's going on, everybody? Not the most interesting thing to talk about, but we got a Fed update FOMC meeting yesterday, the 28th. And basically Powell came out and said, throw the brakes on this, MFer, and just everybody hold your horses for a little bit. We're going to pause. That's what it was anticipated. There's no rate cuts coming. And now we're in a holding pattern again as we wait to see what happens, as we wait to watch the jobs market and unemployment rate along with inflation. Fed comes out, they say inflation's a little elevated. The current administration is saying inflation is over, we beat it, we're good. I've seen numbers, obviously not the official government data, but just other consumer numbers around like 1.5%, 1.2, 1.5%. The official number is somewhere above 2, so like 2.5%, roughly in between 2 and 3, depending on which one you're looking at. Overall, it doesn't really matter. The meetings aren't that interesting. If you want to watch them, go watch them. They take too long and they don't ever really get to the point. Any interesting question is kind of never really answered because they can't, or it would give the game away. The most interesting question I think that I heard when I was listening to it today was the reporter asks basically, what do you have to say to the people that are still struggling with basically cost of living and how inflation's just destroyed their buying power? And Powell does address it in the sense he's like, yeah, the economy, the spending is still there, but it's basically fragmented. The rich keep spending, the poor are cutting back as much as possible because they can't afford it, obviously. And they're watching the bottom half of the population, basically, the way he described it was get more economical with their spending. And he just means basically bargain shopping, like all the discount stores and stuff like that. They're changing their buying habits from, say, you buy name brand stuff to now they're buying the off brand, the general brand, the great values, the private selection or whatever Kroger's is. They're dropping to the lower tier of every product to be able to afford things. And I mean, that's general consensus. I think that's one thing I like talking about on this channel just because the politics stuff is interesting, but I think the economic situation is more like everybody's on the same page on the economic situation. You talk to somebody about politics, somebody might get their feelings hurt or whatever, get defensive and things like that. But if you go, damn, man, don't you remember when McChicken was $1? And everybody's like, dude, I know. And everybody's just like, what is happening? Because to be honest, most people don't understand. Not like I'm some fortune teller or anything, but if you pay attention, it's not that complex to understand. But most people don't have time to pay attention to what the government's doing on the financial end and the impacts of things, especially like when COVID happened. Most people weren't paying attention to the financial ramifications. They're paying attention to the crazy medical and the scary part of the sickness or whatever. And they're not paying attention to the M2 money supply and the government printing money, well, the Federal Reserve printing money into oblivion and then driving inflation up. Now they pay attention when inflation goes up 10% year over year and then everything you buy costs way more, and now we're a couple years down the road and we're at what, 40, 50% easily. Everything's 40, 50% more expensive than it was 5 years ago. They pay attention when you go to buy a car and the interest rate's 15%, or you go to buy a home and it costs 1.5 times, 2 times what it did 5 to 10 years ago, and you just get absolutely raked over the coals with an interest rate as well. And I want to talk about that too, because the Fed rate, they're tied together, but people are like, well, the Fed rate's lower. I actually saw somebody tweet this today where they're like, explain to me why the Fed rate's 3.75 or whatever, and the mortgage rates are in 6 to 7% range depending on credit score. And they're asking, they were genuinely asking, and the way I understand it simply is the Fed rate doesn't set the mortgage rate, the 10-year Treasury does. The Fed rate impacts the 10-year Treasury, but the 10-year Treasury is the more important thing. And then obviously the banks come in and put their little modifier on top of the 10-year Treasury to get some profit, because obviously the bank's got to get some profit in there. So if the 10-year Treasury is around 4%, they put a 1.9%, 2%, 2.5% on there to get their profit. Hey, you're at 6%, 6.5%, pretty easily. And then obviously it's adjusted off credit score. But these things are very important to know, especially if you're a person to go look to buy a home. Obviously your credit score, if you can get it as high as you can, that's great. But right now it really doesn't matter what your credit score is. You're just kind of getting screwed one way or the other. The home price is going to be way higher. Your interest rate's going to be higher than it has, and people can't afford it. And we see that in the housing numbers. I haven't got to talk about housing on here recently, but we're going to get back into it. That home sales are just declining because nobody can afford it. Car sales generally kind of declining. Can't afford it. Everything's too expensive. Everybody has to cut back except the top quarter or so of the population because they own assets. Most people, if you're struggling week to week on the paycheck, you're not going to afford assets and you fall behind. That's the name of the game. Hopefully, if you're watching channels like this, you're trying to get ahead of that, especially if you're younger, investing, paying attention to the way you spend your money, live below your means and not beyond your means, and then get ahead. But like I said, FOMC, not that interesting. We're going to get into some other financial topics and stuff in the upcoming week, but I don't know. You guys let me know what you think. Interest rates are stuck for now, and there's no relief on that end as far as the mortgage rates or interest rates for any big purchases. So just get ready to pay more into perpetuity for now. And I'll catch you guys in the next one.